She didn't think you'd ever leave. In her mind, you were always going to be there waiting, checking, hoping. To her, you were the fallback plan, the man she could walk away from and still return to whenever her world went quiet. She believed she had you in her pocket, not because she was evil, not because she was cruel, but because she thought your love was permanent, unconditional, unshakable. But something happened that she never saw coming. You stopped. You stopped chasing. You stopped watching. You stopped needing her validation to feel like a man. And when you made that decision, even if you didn't announce it, even if nobody else noticed, everything changed. See, this is where the true awakening begins for a man. It's not in the breakup. It's not in the heartbreak. It's in the moment where he realizes that continuing to orbit around someone who has already left is the real prison. It's when he understands that his life doesn't need to be centered on someone else's presence or absence. Most men never get to this point. They get stuck in a loop, checking her profile, wondering what she's doing, imagining what she's thinking, replaying old conversations like a broken record. That cycle can last weeks, months, sometimes even years. And all the while, their own life, their potential, their focus, their growth is being drained silently, one thought at a time. But there comes a day, and for some of you listening, maybe today is that day. The day you wake up and you say, I'm done. Not done with anger, not done with bitterness, done with carrying the weight of someone who has already put that load down. That is the awakening. It's quiet. It doesn't need a final message. It doesn't need a dramatic goodbye. It doesn't even need her to notice. It begins inside. You decide, I will no longer give free rent inside my mind to someone who has chosen to leave it. And let me tell you something powerful. When that shift happens, everything else begins to fall into place. Because here's the truth: chasing doesn't just mean texting constantly, begging for another chance, or showing up where she is. Chasing can be silent. Chasing can be emotional. Chasing can be the endless cycle of imagining her return, the hope that she'll realize your value, the waiting for her to see what she lost. That's chasing too. And that kind of chasing, brothers, it eats away at you every single day. It keeps you weak. It keeps you dependent. It keeps you stuck in a version of yourself that you've already outgrown. But when you stop, when you finally release that need to orbit her world, something shifts inside of you. Your energy, the same energy you were pouring into her, checking her stories, reading into her silences, wondering what she meant by that one text, you redirect it. You take it back. You invest it into your fitness, your career, your friendships, your spiritual peace. You begin to orbit your own world again. And here's the fascinating thing: whether she admits it or not, whether she even fully understands it, she feels it. Women are intuitive. They pick up on energy more than words. They sense when your attention has shifted, when the invisible cord that connected your emotions to her approval has been cut. She might not be able to put it into words, but she feels the withdrawal of your emotional presence. And that's when confusion begins for her. See, she got used to the warmth of your attention. She got used to being able to pull on that invisible line whenever she wanted reassurance, even if she didn't want the relationship. She knew she had space in your mind, and that space gave her comfort even if she wasn't giving you commitment. But when that space goes quiet, when your attention no longer reacts, when your focus is no longer controlled by her availability, that silence hits differently. It's not sadness at first. It's confusion, then shock, and eventually regret. Because now she's not sure if she lost you, or if she lost the version of you who became everything she never believed you could be. But let's pause here. This first stage, the awakening, it's not about her. It's about you. You're not detaching to get her back. You're not pulling away to make her regret. You're detaching Because your peace is worth more than your pain. You're stepping back because your life is too valuable to be lived in someone else's shadow. And here's the Stoic truth. Your worth has never depended on her recognition of it. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "It is not events that disturb people. It is their judgments concerning them." It wasn't the breakup that broke you. It was the meaning you gave it. It wasn't her silence that hurt you. It was the story you told yourself about what her silence meant. It wasn't the fact that she left. It was the belief that you were unworthy without her. And when you awaken to that truth, that your peace is not dependent on her return, you free yourself. This is the moment, my brothers, where you begin to reclaim your center. The part of you that was scattered across old messages, late-night overthinking, scrolling her social media, you gather it back into yourself. And as you do, you start to notice something powerful. You're no longer the same man. You're no longer at the mercy of someone else's availability. You're no longer waiting for closure that may never come. Because you've given yourself closure, you've told yourself the only truth that matters. I am enough without her. And from that truth, you start to rise. That's the awakening. That's where the journey begins. And that's why, my friend, when you stop chasing quietly, calmly, without bitterness, that's the first time she really feels the weight of losing you. Not because you wanted her to feel it, but because you finally chose yourself. And that choice changes everything. The awakening is powerful. But the real transformation begins with the shift. The shift isn't about proving her wrong. It isn't about making her jealous. It isn't even about moving on quickly with someone else. The shift is much deeper. It's about reclaiming your emotional power. See, for far too long, you handed over your emotional energy without even realizing it. You gave her influence over your mood. If she texted, your day lit up. If she stayed silent, your night collapsed. If she smiled at you, you felt worthy. If she ignored you, you questioned your entire identity. That, my friend, is emotional slavery. And most men live their lives that way without realizing it. They believe love is about giving all of themselves away, about being endlessly available, endlessly patient, endlessly forgiving, even when it's not reciprocated. But here's the hard truth. Emotional availability is a currency. And like all currency, if you give it away to someone who doesn't value it, it loses its worth. This is why the shift is so important. The shift happens when you stop attaching your emotional state to someone else's actions. When you stop letting her silence dictate your peace. When you stop needing her recognition to validate your strength as a man. And here's where Stoicism comes in. Because the Stoics taught this thousands of years ago. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Think about that. If she can make you crumble simply by ignoring you, you're not free. If her absence makes you doubt your worth, you're not free. If her decision to leave has the power to destroy your identity, you're not free. Freedom begins when you reclaim your emotional power. And the beautiful thing is, this doesn't require an announcement. It doesn't require a dramatic goodbye. It doesn't even require a conversation with her. It happens silently. It happens internally. It happens the day you decide that her access to your emotions is over. That is the shift. Now, let me make something very clear. This isn't bitterness. This isn't revenge. This isn't about playing games or pretending not to care. This is deeper than that. It's clarity. It's peace. It's self-respect. When you shift, you take the energy you once gave away so freely and you reinvest it. You redirect it toward your mission, your purpose, your growth. You start putting that time into your workouts, your goals, your craft, your friendships, your inner world. Instead of checking when she was last online, you're checking off goals on your to-do list. Instead of decoding silence, you're decoding books, wisdom, ideas that elevate your mind. Instead of waiting for her message, you're waiting for the results of the seeds you've planted in your own life. That's the shift. And here's the fascinating part: women feel this shift often before you even fully realize it yourself. Why? Because energy doesn't lie. She was used to you being emotionally accessible. Even if she didn't want the relationship, she knew your energy was there. She could tug on that invisible cord anytime by posting a picture, by leaving a story, by sending a casual text, and she knew you'd react. But now, that cord is gone. That invisible line is cut. Her tugging brings no response. And that does something to her. It unsettles her. It confuses her. Because what she once assumed was permanent, your emotional attention, has suddenly vanished. That's the real power of the shift. And let me remind you, this isn't about her. This is about you. This is about becoming a man who is centered, grounded, unshakable. A man who no longer builds his worth on someone else's presence. A man who no longer negotiates his peace. Because when you shift into that kind of man, something sacred happens. You reclaim your center. Think about it. For months, maybe years, you've been orbiting her world. She was the sun, and you were the planet revolving around her presence, her moods, her validation. But when you shift, you flip the script. You become the Sunday. You become the center. And everything else revolves around your purpose, your growth, your peace. That is masculine strength at its core. And let me tell you, my brothers, that strength is rare in today's world. Most men chase endlessly. Most men orbit someone else's world. Most men never reclaim their center. But the men who do, the men who make the shift, become unshakable. They walk differently. They speak differently. They carry an energy that says, I don't need validation. I already know who I am. And when she feels that energy, whether she admits it or not, something shifts inside of her too. She starts asking questions. She starts reflecting. She starts wondering, did I misjudge him? Did I underestimate his strength? Was I blind to the man he was becoming? That's the psychology at play. But here's the key. You don't need those questions answered. You don't need her regret. You don't need her return. Because the shift isn't about her recognition. It's about your liberation. That's the moment you stop being broken and start being built. That's the moment your silence becomes your language. That's the moment your peace becomes your proof. So understand this. When you make the shift, you're not just moving on, you're moving up. You're not just surviving, you're evolving. You're not just letting go. You're leveling up into a man who cannot be controlled by silence, absence, or rejection. And that, my brothers, is the kind of man the world cannot break. That's the shift. Now that you've felt the awakening and you've made the shift, we need to go even deeper. We need to talk about the psychology. Why does detachment hit so differently? Why does your silence, your distance, your absence create a ripple effect in her mind that words never could? To answer this, we need to go into human psychology specifically, the psychology of attention and value. Let me start with a truth that might sting. Humans value scarcity. What's always available is always taken for granted. Think about it. Air is the most important thing for survival, yet we rarely stop and appreciate it. Why? Because it's always there. We only notice it when it's scarce. When we're underwater too long, or gasping after a sprint, or struggling to breathe. Suddenly, air becomes precious. The same principle applies in relationships. When your presence, your attention, your availability is constant, She doesn't see it as rare. She doesn't see it as valuable. She sees it as normal, expected, ordinary. But when you detach, when that constant flow of energy stops, the scarcity hits. Suddenly, what she assumed was endless is gone. And the human brain reacts intensely to that kind of shift. Psychologists call this reactance. It's the mind's tendency to crave what has been taken away, even if it wasn't wanted before. It's why people ignore you when you're available but chase you when you pull back. It's why the shoes sitting on the shelf don't seem interesting, but the moment they're marked limited edition or sold out, everyone wants them. Detachment creates scarcity. Scarcity triggers value, and value awakens desire. But here's the important part: you're not detaching as a manipulation tactic. You're not pretending to be scarce. You're actually becoming scarce. Because your energy, your presence, your focus, it is rare. It is precious. It is not something that should be given freely to someone who doesn't honor it. Now, let's go deeper into the female psychology here. A woman feels differently when you move on, not because of the external act of moving on, but because of what it represents. It represents independence. It represents that her influence over you has ended. It represents that you are no longer orbiting her world, you are living in your own. And this is unsettling, because whether she admits it or not, part of her believed you would always be there, that she could always come back if she chose, that your emotional attention was permanent, guaranteed, unquestioned. But your detachment destroys that illusion. It introduces a question into her mind, a question far more powerful than any words you could say. What if he no longer needs me? That question lingers. It echoes, and the more she reflects on it, the heavier it becomes. This is why detachment is more powerful than confrontation. You could send a long text explaining your worth, demanding her recognition, laying out how much you've grown. But words rarely hit the heart, the way silence does. Because silence is undeniable. Silence is real. Silence cannot be debated, cannot be argued, cannot be dismissed. Silence forces her to feel the void. And here's where Stoicism gives you the edge. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." And in this case, the best response is not to respond. The best proof of your strength is not to argue, but to detach. The best way to show your evolution is to live it quietly, powerfully, unshakably. When you embody that, her psychology has no choice but to shift. Because women, like men, are drawn to strength. Not the loud, performative kind, but the quiet, stable, unbothered strength of a man who knows who he is. And let me make this clear. Detachment is not coldness. Detachment is not hatred. Detachment is not bitterness. Detachment is clarity. It's knowing what deserves your energy and what doesn't. It's choosing peace over chaos. It's choosing purpose over chasing. It's choosing growth over games. That's why it hits differently. Because in a world where everyone is desperate for attention, where everyone is trying to prove themselves, to chase validation, to win recognition, you stand apart. You don't chase. You don't beg. You don't explain. You detach. And that detachment speaks louder than any confession, louder than any apology, louder than any attempt at closure. It says, I am whole without you. I am strong without you. I am moving forward, and nothing you do can stop that. And when she feels that, when she realizes the cord is truly cut, it does something profound. It makes her see you differently. Not as the man she left behind, but as the man she underestimated. Not as the boy who needed her validation, but as the man who no longer seeks it. not as the one who was broken, but as the one who was reborn. That's the psychology. That's why detachment hits harder than anger, harder than bitterness, harder than revenge. Because detachment is strength, and strength is unforgettable. Now we arrive at one of the most fascinating parts of this journey, the mirror effect. This is the stage where your detachment doesn't just change you, it changes her. Because when you move on, when you detach with calm strength, it forces her to confront something she may have been running from all along, herself. You see, people project. When she walked away, maybe she justified it in her mind. Maybe she told herself, he'll never change. Maybe she believed he'll always be there waiting. Or worse, she convinced herself, he needs me more than I need him. These thoughts were her shield. They protected her from guilt, from doubt, from regret. But when you detach, when you stop orbiting her world and start building your own, those shields begin to crack. And suddenly, she sees a reflection she did not expect. Because detachment is like holding up a mirror, and in that mirror, she no longer sees the man who needed her. She sees the man who walked away, the man who outgrew her, the man who chose peace over drama, growth over games, and purpose over chasing. And that reflection forces her to ask uncomfortable questions. Did I misjudge him? Was I too quick to dismiss his value? Did I throw away something rare, something real? These questions don't come all at once. They creep in slowly, sometimes in quiet moments when she's alone, sometimes when she sees you shining in your new life, sometimes when she realizes other people now see the value she overlooked. And here's the powerful truth. Reflection is more painful than rejection. When you reject someone, they can blame you. They can paint you as the villain. But when you detach, you remove yourself from the narrative. And that leaves her alone with her own thoughts, her own choices, her own consequences. This is the mirror effect. It forces her to look inward. Now, let me give you an example from Stoicism that ties into this beautifully. Epictetus once said, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." When you detach, you are not reacting with anger, with revenge, or with desperate pleas. You are reacting with indifference, with calm, with quiet strength. That reaction, or rather that lack of reaction, reflects something powerful back at her. That her actions no longer control you. And when she sees that, it doesn't just change how she sees you, it changes how she sees herself. Because now she has to confront this question. If he doesn't need me, why did I think he did? That's the moment insecurity creeps in. That's the moment regret starts to whisper. That's the moment she begins comparing her choices, what she left behind, and what she surrounded herself with now. And more often than not, the comparison is brutal. Because you're growing, you're improving, you're building, while she may be realizing that the validation she chased, the attention she sought, or the new chapter she thought would bring happiness, isn't as fulfilling as she imagined. That's when the mirror becomes unavoidable. It doesn't matter if she shows it or hides it. It doesn't matter if she reaches out or stays silent. Internally, the reflection is there. And here's the beauty. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to post for her. You don't need to send subtle messages. You don't need to flaunt your growth in her face. Because real growth speaks for itself. And it always echoes back through the mirror. See, when you detach, when you move forward, you create contrast. Contrast between the man you were and the man you are now. Contrast between how she remembers you and how you now live. Contrast between her assumptions and reality. And contrast is powerful. Because contrast breeds clarity. Clarity that she lost something valuable. Clarity that she misread your strength. Clarity that she may never again have access to the man you've become. And this is where the regret grows. Because it's no longer about you proving your worth. It's about her realizing she failed to see it when it was right in front of her. That's why the mirror effect is so powerful. Because it's not your voice telling her these truths, it's her own. It's not you convincing her, it's her realizing it on her own. And as every Stoic would say, the truth that comes from within is the hardest truth to ignore. So understand this. Your detachment does more than free you. It forces her reflection. And whether she admits it or not, whether she speaks it or hides it, that reflection will change how she feels about you. Because at the end of the day, the mirror doesn't lie. Now, we've reached one of the most fascinating turning points in this entire journey. The moment she comes back. Yes, the comeback phase. That stage where silence breaks, where curiosity turns into action, where regret transforms into an attempt at reconnection. And here's the truth. If you've detached with true strength, this moment almost always comes. It may take weeks. It may take months. Sometimes even years. But the energy shift you've created, the calm confidence, the forward momentum, the life rebuilt without her, eventually draws her back in, like a moth to a flame. But let's slow down here. Why does she come back? What triggers that moment where she suddenly reaches out after silence? There are a few common reasons. First, curiosity. She wants to know if you're still thinking about her, if you still care, if the door she once walked through is still open. This curiosity grows stronger the more indifferent you remain, because indifference is the most powerful signal you can ever send. Second, comparison. She looks at her life now and compares it to the life you've built without her. She might see you stronger, calmer, more focused, surrounded by new energy, new people, maybe even new love. And suddenly, that comparison feels heavy. It whispers, maybe I chose wrong. Third, regret. This is the deepest reason. Regret doesn't always hit immediately. At first, she may feel free, liberated, confident in her decision. But time has a way of revealing truths. And eventually, she sees what she walked away from and realizes its rarity. This is why the comeback phase happens. Now, what does this phase actually look like? It rarely begins with some grand confession. Most of the time, it starts small. A text out of nowhere. Hey, how have you been? A random like or comment on your post after months of silence. An excuse to reach out, something like, I was just thinking about that song we used to listen to. Or even more subtle, bumping into you accidentally when deep down you know it wasn't an accident at all. These are feelers, little tests to see if the door is still open, to see if your energy is still available, to see if you're still orbiting her world, or if you've truly built a new one without her. And here's where the wisdom of Stoicism becomes your greatest weapon. Because how you respond or choose not to respond defines everything. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Her comeback is an outside event. You cannot control it, you cannot predict it, but you can always control your reaction. And the Stoic response is this: no chasing, no emotional explosion, no desperate attempt to pull her back. Just calm clarity. See, this is where most men make a mistake. They take her comeback as validation, as proof that she still cares, and they rush in, opening the door wide, giving her the power again. But a Stoic man doesn't do that. A Stoic man sees her comeback for what it truly is, a test of his detachment. And so he responds with balance. Not coldness, but not eagerness either. Not bitterness, but not blind forgiveness. Just calm presence. Because the comeback is not the destination, it's a ripple. And if your sense of self is rooted in her attention again, you will lose everything you've built. remember this. Her reaching out does not define your value. Your growth does. Your discipline does. Your ability to remain grounded, regardless of what she does. Now, let me ask you, if she left when you gave her everything, why should her return suddenly dictate your peace? That's the Stoic question. And this is where true strength is tested. Because sometimes, the right answer is not to let her back in at all. Sometimes the right answer is to stay silent, to keep walking your path. And other times, if you do choose to engage, it should never come from need. It should come from clarity. From the understanding that your life is already full, already whole, already moving. Her presence would be an addition, not a completion. That's the power of the comeback phase. Not that she returns, not that she acknowledges your value, but that you no longer need her acknowledgement. Because by the time she reaches back, you've already reached forward. So remember, her comeback is not your victory. Your growth is. Her regret is not your trophy. Your peace is. And the most powerful thing you can do in this phase is continue walking with that unshakable calm that brought her back in the first place. And now we arrive at the final part of this journey, the destination, the phase that Stoicism ultimately leads us to, freedom. Not freedom in the sense of running away from relationships, or freedom in the sense of never feeling again, but freedom in the truest sense. The ability to live with strength, with clarity, with peace, without needing validation from anyone, not even the woman who once held your heart. Let me ask you this. What is the most dangerous prison a person can live in? It's not made of walls or bars. It's the prison of needing approval, the prison of living for someone else's recognition. And this is the prison Stoicism helps you escape. Because what happens when you no longer need her to validate you? What happens when her attention, or her absence, no longer shakes your center? You become unshakable, untouchable, truly free. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." And one of the greatest wastes of life is pouring your energy into chasing validation from others. You cannot control whether they admire you, respect you, or return to you. But you can always control the life you build, the strength you carry, and the peace you protect. So what does freedom look like in practice? Freedom looks like this. You wake up and live your life according to your values, not hers, not society's, not anyone's but your own. You no longer measure your worth by who stays or who leaves. You no longer lose sleep over unread messages or unanswered calls. You no longer twist yourself to fit into someone else's world because you've built your own. Freedom means your mind is not a battlefield of what-ifs and maybes. It is calm. It is steady. It is focused on what you can control: your work, your discipline, your health, your growth, your spirit. And ironically, it is in this very freedom that attraction becomes strongest. Because when you no longer chase, when you no longer cling, when you no longer beg for validation, you radiate something rare: self-respect. And self-respect is magnetic. But here's the key. Your freedom is not about making her want you again. It's about no longer caring if she does. That is the highest level of strength. Now, let's tie everything together. At first, she took you for granted. She thought you would always be there. Then she watched you detach. She felt the silence, the absence, the space you created. And slowly, curiosity, comparison, and regret pulled her back. But you are no longer the same man she walked away from. Because you didn't waste this pain. You transformed it. You didn't drown in bitterness, you built discipline. You didn't chase her shadow, you built your own light. And now, whether she comes back or not, whether she stays or goes. You are free. Seneca once said, "He is most powerful who has power over himself." That's what you've gained. That's the prize. Not her attention, not her return, not her regret, but mastery over yourself. Because when you reach this stage, nothing she does can break you. Not her silence, not her distance, not even her return, because your peace no longer depends on her. This is what Stoicism teaches us. True power is not controlling others, it is controlling yourself. True love is not clinging, it is appreciating. True strength is not in holding on, it is in letting go and still standing tall. So, as we close this journey, remember this. You do not need validation to be worthy. You do not need attention to have value. And you do not need her return to prove your strength. You are strong because you've learned to walk alone. You are valuable because you live with discipline and purpose. And you are free because you no longer live chained to anyone's approval. And when she sees that, when she feels that unshakable calm in you, she will understand the cost of taking you for granted. Not because you wanted revenge, not because you wanted her regret, but because you chose peace over chaos, growth over weakness, freedom over attachment. That is the highest form of victory. That is the essence of Stoicism. So live free, live strong, live without needing anything outside yourself to define your worth. Because in the end, that is when you truly win.